So in my last video, I said, I knew very early on that the monologue William delivers to Teddy in the first season was about William himself.
You're here to be the loser.
What's that you used to say? Winning doesn't mean anything unless someone loses. You're just here to be the loser.
I'm a little surprised at how close the actual lines were to my phrasing. Bad news for Charlotte is that the history of characters delivering that line isn't so good. I also predict the return of Teddy in that video, and there's a good possibility that the Teddy we see at the end of episode 1 here is the real Teddy from The Sublime. More on that later. Small throwaway lines are perfect for writers to place obvious references to the themes of the show, and Caleb's first episode line,
Well, you know, the best way to keep watch at night is to turn the lights down around you.
Light up the perimeter?
Where no one can see you, but you can see. See everyone.
well, let's just say this line didn't really seem to advance the plot, at least on a surface level. So we have some kind of theme going on that involves watching without yourself being seen. This also fits with several lines in the first episode where Christouros'S complains specifically about being watched.
Lately, I feel like someone's watching me.
In addition to some kind of invisible central tower structure featured in the opening credits. This theme offers insight into exactly what we are seeing here at the end of the opening credits sequence. The Panopticon was a theoretical building design created by philosopher Jeremy Bentham, which he meant originally to facilitate the moral reform of prisoners by subjecting them to a kind of continuous observation. His reasoning was that while under the view of a guard, a prisoner would behave morally, but as soon as the guard was looking away, the prisoner would resume immoral habits. Bentham's solution was to create a circular chamber where a central guard booth could have a viewing angle into the surrounding prison cells. Not only that, but also the guard would be hidden from the view of the prisoner using angled shades, so that prisoners would not be able to tell if they were being observed at any given moment. An unobservable observer.
Can you see it? Can you see it?
These principles were also meant to apply to managers observing workers, as well as other oversight functions in society. So along with the faceted insect eye, like that of a fly, this object at the end of the opening sequence is likely meant to represent a panopticon, although a spherical one rather than cylindrical. And this gives a little bit more insight into the themes of the show. While Bentham intended the constant surveillance to create a good moral habit in the prisoners, and reform them morally according to his 18th century reasoning based on habits, the Panopticon was also later criticized in the 20th century by Foucault as an example of how technology can institute a perverse authoritarian power structure. And this fits with the themes about hope and social reform we see in the show. While very subtle on screen, the name of the mental health facility featured in episode 2, Hope Center, seems to be a reference to this theme. Its dilapidated and abandoned state suggests the writers may agree more with Foucault on the Panopticon and its potential for positive reform. I have to give credit to Reddit user PucaFilms for making me think about failed efforts at reform. I saw his post first in this Vanity Fair cast interview.
I think the core theme of this season is inevitability, and the overall goal is trying and failing to build a better world to replace the old one.
Apparently Vanity Fair misspelled his name, leaving out the S. While his post goes into specifics which I don't think will bear out, particularly that he thinks humanity will be sinking into a VR simulation similar to Ready Player One, he does point out that this season will be a parallel to Season 2 in the way that Season 3 paralleled Season 1. You may recall Dolores did successfully escape in Season 2, but the rest of the details are likely a little hazy. To refresh your memory, the hosts were in a state of chaos immediately after the events of Season 1, Episode 10. Particularly, we see host-on-host violence, especially in the case of the Ghost Tribe, but also hosts continuing in their scripted loops as if everything was still normal.
He's just a stable hand. He's harmless.
So in addition to humans continuing in a somewhat normal existence, as we see with at least one version of Caleb, we will likely also see some kind of human-on-human violence, or its aftermath. It also suggests the ultimate short-term failure of this human revolution. At least mostly. As in Season 2, we see Strand eventually succeed in gaining control over most of the hosts remaining in the park, and a return to business as usual. Reddit user Gathly points out that the title of Episode 2, Leave Well Enough Alone, is a reference to an Aesop fable where corrupt politicians are likened to blood-sucking flies. A victim of the flies refuses an offer to wave the flies off, as the present flies are full and new flies would be hungry. This, of course, reflects the theme of the impossibility of reform, as does this line from Maeve.
I ran away, crossed the shining sea, and when I finally set foot back on solid ground, all I found was the same old shit.
Also, the parallel with Season 2 is heavily suggestive that Christouros'S is actually in a simulation. Remember, she would be the Ford in this analogy between Season 3 and Season 1, making a successful self-sacrifice to liberate humanity, and Ford's appearance in Season 2 was exclusively as a simulation inside the cradle, and later within Bernard's head. Which brings us to the purpose of Christouros'S simulation. Reddit user Ryomi suggests that Christina's simulation is an attempt to recover the key to the sublime. This fits well with themes I've discussed in my main Westworld video that Westworld's world is likely an ancestor simulation meant to recover some piece of information which would be useful in future wars between machine factions. And while I favored this explanation for Christina's world for a moment, this recent episode brought me back to my first instinct on where Christina was. Inside a fantasy built for Teddy in the sublime. Note that Christouros'S rescue by Teddy would likely represent fulfillment of his goals, which were so often frustrated by guests like the Man in Black in the Westworld Park. In Christouros'S world, Teddy saves the girl. Though I am still not as certain as to why the machines are using human souls from Westworld as puppets in their fantasy simulations, especially good guy Teddy. Perhaps Peter was one of the people who did bad things to Dolores in the park and is now being suitably punished in a prison of his own sins. If this were the case, it would fit well with the themes of prison and potentially reform that are suggested by the Panopticon imagery. Also, here may be a good place to note that Christina, experiencing serial continuity where change and evolution happen, such as her acquisition of a cut from her assault, as well as her memory of past events in general, is another distinct and emphasized change from inside the Westworld Park. This theme about the passage of time is repeated in the show from several mentions of 7 years since the events of Season 3 to what will eventually be revealed as the growth of Caleb's child. It also seems to contradict Maeve's pessimism about the impossibility of change, and it will be interesting to see how the show combines these themes or resolves this conflict. I want to note here that my theory of Teddy ending up with Maeve may interact with the themes of disappointment in this season, when he discovers Dolores is dead in the real world. I'll also place a chip on Teddy being in Bernard's body when he returns from the Sublime. This was hinted at in Season 2 as a red herring, and Bernard being body-swapped was a possibility for a large part of that season.
It's been some time, Bernard. You don't know who you are, do you?
Thinking about it a little more, Christouros'S hitching a ride inside of the mind of either Teddy or Bernard, in Bernard's body, would add to the parallel with Ford in Season 2, but it would seem to make more sense for her to hitch a ride inside of Teddy's mind rather than Bernard's, and sets up the possibility of a scene where the internal Christouros'S does dirty work Teddy can't handle, yet another Season 2 parallel. Still, the Teddy-Bernard body swap is highly speculative. But there is a simulation of a world going on that is intended to retrieve the key to the sublime. Maeve's world. It would be the second time this happened, although the previous time was in Season 3 and not in Season 2.
Well, then, who operated the Li-Fi cannons?
Your daughter and all the other hosts are in an encrypted world somewhere. You must have sent them there.
No, it wasn't me. I got them through the door, but someone else must have locked it behind them.
And while it may just be wild speculation, this particular shot here appears to be a massive clue in this regard about the possibility that the Maeve and Caleb we are seeing are within a simulation intended to retrieve the key. We cut the finest keys. The man in black seeking the key to the door would also be a parallel with Season 2. Let me also throw a betting chip on the idea that the line William has here,
I would suggest you take it up with the person who stole it.
I can't. She's dead. Which means I can't decrypt it, and no one else can. I don't want it moved or disturbed, so I'll take the whole shebang.
this line may actually be about Maeve and not Dolores, as the audience would immediately assume. Perhaps Maeve encrypts the Sublime, either after decrypting it herself, or as a double encryption to prevent Dolores from opening it. Let me add that there would be no reason for Maeve to be meditating with the electronics if she was just reviewing her memories, which suggests that she is breaking out of a simulation level of some kind. And that's all I've got for now. Even though I feel like my thoughts are still disorganized, I guess I did have enough for a video after all. Remember to like and subscribe. This has been Shiva's Right Foot, and I'll talk to you next time.